Hey guys, welcome back to Altaz-Review, where we discuss all kinds of games, good and bad, and talk about some of our favorite moments. Today, I wanted to dig a little deeper into God of War Ragnarok. Now, it's been a pretty famous game already. I think there are some elements that need a lot more talking about. Things that just haven't been appreciated enough. Even if it's won a million awards, there are characters and there are story elements that make me think that God of War Ragnarok has really peaked out in terms of storytelling. Now, initially, hearing about God of War Ragnarok, I assumed it's gonna be just like the old game. And that's not really a bad thing, but I expected more of the same thing, which didn't really excite me all that much. It was just another sequel. Few more bells and whistles, but the same game overall. After playing it, I saw that God of War Ragnarok has a genuine identity of its own, and it still made the story interesting enough that it's connecting to the original game. Being an amazing game on its own and still using the first part to expand our story way more than we could have thought. This game has surpassed my expectations quite a bit, and it's probably one of my favorite stories of all time. But God of War Ragnarok hasn't really told the perfect story in the traditional sense. It has a few elements and a few characterizations that haven't been done in any other game. In that way, God of War Ragnarok is actually pretty unique, but let's dive into that a little more in this video. I think it's safe to say that God of War Ragnarok and God of War as a series has an amazing story. It rivals many other amazing games and always lives up to the hype it has. But Ragnarok does something very different, something no other game does. It creates a very human relationship in a way that no other game has really accomplished. Games have tried. Games like The Last of Us want to make a father-child relationship. And there are so many other amazing stories that build upon a character or build upon character relationships even over multiple titles. Combining both games, and even more notable in Ragnarok, is the development of Kratos and Atreus' relationship. The entire time while playing this game, I could sense a mirror of what it's like to be with my own father. All the difficulties and all the emotions going between Kratos and Atreus is something that you would have felt with your own parents. Learning to understand both sides, learning to establish trust and respect, and to balance that out. Kratos and Atreus are naturally estranged from each other since they never really had much of a connection earlier on. But as the games went on, we saw in the first part how they struggled to connect to each other, and by the end, they got a little closer. They started to see each other's point of view. But the first part's entire story comes together really well by the time we reach Ragnarok. Because now we see that after all they've been through, both Kratos and Atreus have changed heavily. They've changed how they take each other's opinions. They've changed how they speak to each other. They respect each other in a different way. They have a different level of trust. And one of my favorite things is how they start adopting each other's dialogues and each other's thought process. From beginning to end, in Ragnarok, Kratos and Atreus both have a steady development, where they start trusting each other more, where they start seeing each other's point of view a little better. But even the kind of things they don't realize is how they're learning from each other without really acknowledging it. Atreus starts using his father's line of logic, and Kratos starts using his emotions and his words more, realizing he has to reach out to the other person from their heart, not just by logic or just by what he wants. In every step of the way, their relationship genuinely seems like it's a father and son interacting. They never lose sight of the bigger goals and the bigger story in front of them, but they always focus on the relationship at the same time. They don't belittle how dangerous the situation is, and they don't take for granted how important the father and the son is. There were so many moments where I saw Kratos and Atreus either having a fight or being in a more strained situation, and I thought, as a story, what's the best way to take the relationship? What's the best dialogue that will serve the story? But every single time, their reactions reflected more of a natural relationship rather than serving the story or the plot. The entire development was more about their characters and how they should react, rather than how to progress the plot or the story. And that's also amazing. I didn't know how any one person would react because they reacted like real people. They took into account how they feel, and they took into account how they should be acting. It was a great balance, and it really shows you that video games are art. These are actors, amazing actors that are serving through dialogue and facial expressions. That's also where current gen technology really takes a big part, because watching how their faces change based on their personalities, based on their reactions, you can see the emotion just in their acting. So it's amazing seeing their faces contort in anger, or to see an actor react without any words, just seeing their body language and their facial expressions. And God of War Ragnarok takes full advantage of this technology, using every part of their body language and every dialogue, and even every event throughout both games to establish what the characters are feeling and helping you understand what they're going through. I don't think it's comparable to say that God of War Ragnarok is better than other games in storytelling, but it's the kind of story it tells that no other game has successfully done. By creating a father and son relationship without overshadowing the bigger plot, they created something that's so reflective of what really goes on. Because as it should be done, the father and son relationship isn't something special. It's something that everyone has. It's something that everyone can reflect on. We all have some parent or guardian that we have these same arguments and agreements with. The way Kratos and Atreus just can't handle moving on without each other. And at the same time, whenever they're together, they end up in some argument or some disagreement. It's a genuine show of how much they love each other and how much they depend on each other. It's just how family works, and the game really defines that well. They'll always have this kind of relationship, and it doesn't matter how big or small the bigger plot is, their relationship will always stay the same. And this game defines it so well. You're focusing on an important story with some really compelling characters, and you're also focusing on the little details of how characters interact with each other. It tells multiple stories at once, and none of those stories impede each other. And then we have the amazing characters. Every single character in this game is made so amazing. There's so much depth behind them because you know what they've been through, and you have an idea of what they're thinking at all times. But the characters that stand out to be the most, the main characters, Kratos and Atreus, and surprisingly Thor. Now the first part told us all kinds of stories about Thor. How terrible he is, how many giants he's killed. Thor seems to have no real remorse. He's just destroying everything in his way. Odin sends him for a task and he does it without feeling a thing. You don't have the best opinion of Thor throughout the game. And even some important antagonists in part 1 are Thor's sons. So the only thing you know about Thor is that he's a mindless murderer and that no one has a good opinion of him. And starting God of War Ragnarok, you get the same kind of image. As soon as he approaches you, he's very distant. He seems violent in just his body language. It seems like all he can think about is fighting or just getting things over with. And now you're starting to connect those stories to the man in front of you, and you don't think very well of him. But as it goes forward, you start to see the same things in Thor as you saw in Kratos. Technically, Kratos has been through all the same things that Thor has. You already know that Kratos from the original games wasn't a very good person. He mentions it himself. He mentions how many sins he has. He mentions how he just destroyed everything, and that it's in his nature to be destructive. And with Thor, once Atreus meets Thor personally, we see that Thor is more caring about his children. He has certain struggles with Odin, and he's struggling with a lot of personal trauma as well. The more he speaks and the more we see him act, it seems more like he's a victim of what he's been made to do. It seems like he's trapped by his own atrocities. And this is such a great mirror of what Kratos has been through. Kratos was given a chance to be better. Kratos fought against all the things that were making him worse, and now he's trying to turn his life around. But he feels like he doesn't deserve it. At the same time, as we see more of Thor, we find someone who's been trapped by this violence. He's still just Odin's pawn. He has to do whatever he says. He had to throw his sons at Kratos just as some pawns that were thrown away. It's like he doesn't have control over his life. He feels like he doesn't deserve to take control back. Like he's trapped to be this mindless puppet because he's been so destructive. He doesn't deserve to be forgiven. And Kratos and Thor both feel the same way. And Atreus is like that common understanding between both of them. Seeing how Thor is and seeing how Kratos is, in the same way, Atreus, watching all the characters in front of him, has really grown. You can see how he steadily learned about everything around him, and he had his bratty moments in the first game, and he also had some more thoughtful moments in the first game. But now, in the second part, he has a lot more responsibility. Now that Ragnarok is here, everything rests on Loki. It all rests on Atreus. People expect so much from him. Kratos wants him to be better. Others want him to be a savior, and the prophecy says he's a champion. There's so much riding on his shoulder, and he has to decide what kind of man he wants to be. And it's not just Kratos who gets to decide what kind of person he'll grow into. Kratos is just doing his best, as any father would, and every other character is just giving their piece. So we see Atreus slowly determine what's right and what's best, to question what he's been through, to question whether his ideas are paying off. And it's amazing to see him learn from his father and from other characters. He's mimicking so much of the actions of all the characters around him. He even uses a very Kratos mentality to solve a lot of problems in this part. And you can see him develop himself very genuinely. Every part of him that he is today, you can see exactly where he learned all those things. You can see how he learned to be the way he is. It's amazing to see great character development, but it's even better to see where the development is coming from. And Kratos, Thor, and Atreus all influence each other in different ways to grow as characters, and you can see exactly where their path is leading up to. And it's amazing to see what pushes them, how close they feel to each other, and what really changes them at the last moments. How Atreus really finds himself by the end of the game, how Kratos finally decides to change, and how Thor finally decides to take control of his own life rather than give up and say that he doesn't deserve it. And it's the entire characterization throughout that made the story how great it is. Honestly, the story wasn't that deep, but the characters made it the way it was. It's about why the characters want the story to progress that way that made it so interesting. Even in terms of gameplay, I think Ragnarok has improved quite a bit. Now, I'd already heard that apparently there's gonna be new bosses and new fights, but the fights are way more interesting and in-depth than I could have thought. One of my favorite additions was the new weapon, Dropnir. We already had a perfect mechanic with the Leviathan axe. It's so amazing being able to throw it and call it back, and the physics of how it works and how it comes back from any given position. Once they introduced the Blades of Chaos, they had to make sure they worked just as well as they did in the original games, but they also had to make sure it works in this game. And they got such a nice balance with that weapon. Both the Leviathan axe and the Blades of Chaos are just so perfect. It's amazing to use them, and any new weapon that came in has to match up the same quality. And Dropnir as a mechanic, as a tool, and as a weapon is so amazing. It became another one of my favorite weapons. Now, as a spear, it has a great moveset, and the idea of being able to throw an infinite number of spears and then blow them up when you want, now you have an entirely different way of fighting with each weapon. The amount of damage you do, how fast each weapon is, and how much you have to think while using each one. One of my favorite fights throughout the whole game was the fight against Heimdall. Dropnir as a weapon was made to defeat Heimdall. That was supposed to be his weakness. I assume there's gonna be a big cutscene showing how Dropnir is Heimdall's weakness. But to use Dropnir in the gameplay that actually works with the lore is one of the most interesting parts. You actually have to blindside him. You have to use the weapon in a thoughtful way that Heimdall won't know what's coming. You have to land it close to his feet. You have to catch him off guard. You can actually see why Dropnir works against Heimdall by the gameplay rather than just by the story. And that's an amazing use of the weapon. There were so many more boss fights in this game, and such a big variety of enemies. Fighting so many unique bosses with all kinds of different attacks and different elements. It's a big improvement from the first game. I actually didn't know what the next fight would be like, and every fight took into account what weapons you're using and how you're going to be using them. The game had a great story and improved combat greatly. It's amazing how the developers still have so many fresh ideas to use, and even though they had a near-perfect formula, they still found ways to improve it. But the main point I wanted to make is that one of the best things about God of War Ragnarok is the relationships and how the characters interact with each other. I still wouldn't say it's my favorite story of all time, but the characterization is definitely the best I've ever seen in any media. I've never seen a father-son relationship or any relationship be depicted that accurately, and accurate in terms of both characters and in terms of the story. The relationships in this game never overshadow the main plot and are never overshadowed by the main plot, and they're so accurate to how a relationship would actually be. It really felt like a genuine relationship between a father and a son. All the arguments, all the agreement, and all the love is so well depicted. And it's amazing how they were able to get that kind of characterization and how the actors could portray it so well in their dialogues and in their body language and just in their characterizations. By making a story that's constantly engaging and by making combat so interesting, even more interesting than the first game, it helps you stay immersed in the game, stay interested in the game, and it helps you appreciate the characters even more. Because every side quest and every main quest tells you a little more about the characters. It adds to the world and the lore even more. And by the end, the entire game throws you a curveball. The characters' final developments, the way the battle's climax went, you couldn't expect any of this. And considering that the game was based on Destiny, it was amazing to see how things followed Destiny and how things didn't. The story was done so well. Seeing the ending where this amazing father-son relationship ends by having them leave each other. Honestly, some of the most painful moments was seeing Kratos and Atreus apart. Every second they weren't together, every second Atreus was alone or Kratos was without Atreus was so painful. So seeing that ending when they finally solved everything, where Kratos admitted to Atreus as a grown man and he's proud of him, where Atreus is so happy for Kratos being there for him and helping him out, it still makes me tear up. And that's why it was so heartbreaking when Atreus has to go on an adventure by himself, and Kratos, being an amazing father, has to support his decision. Even though it hurts him, he has to let Atreus go. And even though it hurts Atreus, he knows he has to go. Watching this amazing tale go by, watching such a great interaction between both characters, and seeing how it ends is both happy and sad. It's hard to describe how you feel, but at the end what you really feel is this is a genuine father and son relationship, and this was a great story. And I think it's that part that should be reflected more. God of War Ragnarok is not just a good story game, it's an amazing relationship done well. In any case, those were my thoughts on God of War Ragnarok and what I loved most about the game. Every part of the game really surpassed my expectations, but I think the characters and the relationships were the most striking part. Let me know in the comments what you think and whether you agree or disagree. I'd love to hear more about what you guys think and what other games you'd like to hear about. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And if you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing. Thank you for watching Altaz-Review. I hope I see you here again.